Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first panel in the series Academic Job Search Demystified. My name is Alyssa Crittenden. I'm the Vice Provost for Graduate Education and the Dean of the Graduate College. I'm going to stay seated because we learned with the camera angle that if I stand, I'm headless. So we're going to have very casual, very relaxed today. We are just going to have a conversation for those of you who are interested in learning about the process of applying for an academic job. This is a really, we tried to time it in such a way that if you're going on the job market or you're starting to think about going on the job market, that this would be information that is timely for you as you're working through that process. And as we were thinking through, well, who would be best equipped to give us this sort of 10,000-foot view on application materials and how you prep them? And the very first thought that jumped into my head was departmental chairs, of course. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. But first, I would like to introduce my colleague, Ege Sanel, who is hiding behind the camera. Ege, can you, there's Ege, who is helping us with all of the tech. He is one of our GAs at the Graduate College and is really helping us out today. So Ege, thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
Of course,
and Alyssa Gardner, who couldn't be with us today, but did a lot of work in terms of getting this going. So thank you so much to Alyssa as well. It's a very small team, small but mighty team at the Grad Academy that helps us put all this together. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we have a set of questions, but this is also just a time for all of you to ask questions. So if anyone online or if either one of you has questions, now is the time to pose them because you have just a wealth of information. I heard the number of searches, but now I'm going to ask that of each of you. So be thinking about your number, you can estimate, or how many you've been a part of in your career, just a ballpark. So I will start today by introducing Dr. Daniel Benyshek, who is a professor in the Department of Anthropology and was the chair of the Department of Anthropology for the last 5 years and recently transitioned off. But he'll be sharing his information with us. And I always forget to do this. And so I said this morning I was not going to forget to do this. Dan is also my spouse, and I sometimes forget to tell people that, and it's very weird. And so also, Dan is my spouse, and we co-direct our lab together in the Department of Anthropology.
So if you see me wink at her in the middle of this.
Yeah, right, yeah, so we share graduate students, co-parents, and we also co-direct a lab, and sometimes I forget to tell people that, and I just want everyone to know. Okay. Next, we have Dr. Megan Becker, Department Chair and Professor of English. And finally, last but absolutely certainly not least, we have Dr. Joe Morgan, Chair and Interim Director, Crew Disability Center in the Department of Early Childhood, Multilingual, and Special Education. So we have two folks from the College of Liberal Arts and from the College of Education. And Dan is a STEM adjacent researcher. So I chose him in the Department of Anthropology because he will also be able to talk about bench work and lab related work as well, in addition to other disciplines. So we tried to cast the net as widely as we could to capture as many of your disciplines as possible. All right, so the first question, roughly, and this one I just made up on the fly just for like an icebreaker, entertainment purposes. How many searches since you've been at UNLV have you roughly been a part of in any capacity?
And you know, I haven't added them up, but I've somewhere between 15 and 20.
Okay, 15 and 20. All right, so Dr. Becker.
Yeah, I think I've only done 13.
Only 13.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I thought of another number. Which
Okay.
is, I think I applied to over 200 jobs.
Wow.
Wow, okay, I hope everyone heard that online, that Dr. Becker applied. Now the chair of the Department of English at an R1 institution applied to over 200 positions. So that, thank you. That is a good number to share. That really is important for our students to hear.
And over a couple of years.
Right, good, thank you so much. Joe, do you have a number?
25, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so.
And I applied to about 25 positions.
Okay,
so yeah,
perfect.
25 and 25. That's
So
right.
this is a wealth of knowledge here at your disposal, and I have questions, but this is not my panel, so I'm gonna Be quiet. Eggy is going to monitor the question. You're going to monitor the chat. If you have questions, please dump them into the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. If we have any questions here to start off with, I have a bevy of questions here, but I want to make sure that the students have an opportunity to answer if there's anything that's burning at this point, or we can go with our questions that we have prepared. You'll have ample opportunity, so if you're feeling shy, that's all right. All right, I'm going to kick us off. Feel free to type it into the chat or to raise your hand, and Ege will be monitoring that for us throughout the panel. So the first question, there are a lot here. We're probably not going to get through all of them. But I think the first question that I would like to pose, because we don't know how much information any of the students have about the process in general, is sort of an overarching summary of what this process looks like. Meaning, how do you even look for a job? How do you know when you're supposed to start preparing your materials? How do you know if you are ready to even hit the job market? So I think I'd like to start with some of those big questions first before we get into the weeds, because I think that that's something that students have been sharing with me. They're not sure where to begin. So I think that would be the first question I would pose to the panel. And just feel free to share at will.
Okay, I'll start.
Wonderful.
Well, in our discipline, and I assume other disciplines, there's sort of there's a lead professional organization. So in English literature, it's the Modern Language Association. To a lesser extent, for creative writers, they also go through MLA, but they might, in addition, go through Associated Writing Professionals. There's a professional organization for composition and rhetoric studies, but I would say most things go through the MLA. So if you don't know what your discipline's professional organizations are, you should ask your professors. Our department has a departmental membership that dozens of people can access. So that gives people access to the job listing database. And this thing called the job information list with the MLA is where most of the jobs are listed. I could say so much more about that, but it used to be paper. Now it's not paper anymore. So just learn how the database works too, and get really good at looking for every possible thing that you would be qualified for. Like in our field, people tend to have period specializations, but also national literatures, and you can have more than one specialization. You can apply for jobs in 4 different specializations. I did that and got responses from all of them, really. So cast a wide net, be aware of what the sources are. And there are many more than there used to be. So there are more general higher ed databases as well, but you should know your field. Great.
That was a really good point. So I hope all of you were able to hear that. To look at your discipline-specific organizations first, but be sure to cast a wide net. Great.
Yeah, I would say similarly, I think we go in reverse. Most colleges of education are now posting on higher ed jobs through the Chronicle, and so they'll go big, broad, and then disciplines will push out those announcements from those larger websites. So we always encourage doctoral students to look at higher ed jobs or Chronicle. There's a multitude of disciplines in education, so often colleges will put the application on the big global website, and then we'll market specific positions through our professional organizations. And so the 2 things that I would recommend are, agree, looking at the database that's going to form your discipline, whether that's one of the bigger ones or one that's specific to an organization, but then also talking to your faculty members about your advisors about where you want to go. I think I've gotten 3 job announcements today from my professional networks that just said, do you know people? Can you share these job announcements with your candidates? And so your faculty advisors and committee and folks in your department probably also have their finger on the pulse of where there might be specific positions, because we're on listservs and people just call us and say, we love UNLV grads, can you send me an application or something like that? So I think the database, and then also having conversations about where you want to go, what you're interested in, because we get a lot of cold calling too.
Great. Thank you.
You know, great points by both my colleagues. I would say that it's very similar in our discipline in anthropology in terms of where these jobs are posted. I would just add, I have nothing else to really add to those 2 points other than to say, in terms of this overall process, and this is especially, I think, important for folks who are maybe out in front of this upcoming challenge and opportunity, which is finding an academic job, and that is start early. This process is a lengthy one, and scrambling at the last minute to pull your application together, to request letters, and to put the applications in is a recipe for a less than strong application. So I would say, to the extent that you can start to look at job ads, maybe as much as a year ahead of time, to understand how many jobs are typically posted, particularly for specialties. What sort of things are departments and universities looking for in terms of the qualifications and so forth? I think that will help you start to think about the process as well. So, time.
Great. Yes, please.
So, with the references, ahead of it, I know that past references I've asked for, they usually my advisor would be sent directly to, and that doesn't really exchange hands directly.
Right.
But for convenience of like potentially being able to apply as things come up, is it appropriate to ask for a reference letter that I could have generically or broad applications, or is it something?
That's a great question. I'm going to repeat it in case folks online weren't able to hear. Was a question about asking for letters of reference and whether or not it's appropriate for the student to receive the letter first before distributing it out to the jobs. And now we're going to let our panelists respond.
I think it's a great question. My personal philosophy is, if I don't feel like I can share the reference with a student, then I'll let them know I don't think I'm the right person to write a reference. So I'll usually give a copy of the reference. I tend to not give global letters, primarily because I think it goes back to like the preparing for the job announcement. Sometimes like job announcements have different nuanced things they're looking for in an applicant. So I may use the same base letter, but tweak it based on, like, if you're applying to an institution and I note that they really are interested in, I don't know, your intervention design work in our field, I might tweak the letter to focus on your skills related to that, where a different job might be more focused on teacher education and how you develop course syllabi. So I'll write a fresh letter. I won't always write a completely fresh letter, but I will freshen the letter based on the job announcement, because there are some hints within there sometimes. And I think that's a good conversation to have with your faculty references, because those hints often will tell us the candidate that they're looking for, and we can then speak to your particular qualifications for there. Some of them are oftentimes opposed, like one institution might want this, but another one wants something else, and they're not looking for the skills the other person was looking for. So I think having a canned letter misses those nuances. So I'll always share it with students so they know what it is I'm writing about. I'll also ask students, like, what role do you want me to serve? What do you want me to speak to? Do you want me to speak to your scholarship, your teaching? Like, what's the particular reference letter you'd like me to write? And so I don't know if that's the same across all disciplines, but I do try to pay attention to the differences in job announcements when I'm supporting candidates.
So I guess it kind of goes in with just like being open with them and having this conversation with them before.
Yeah.
And you can continue that. Oh,
Yeah, be prepared for that. It's a question I always ask students who ask me to write a letter is, what do you want me to speak to?
okay.
And then can you give me the evidence you want me to hit? Now I'm gonna add my own things based on I know, but if you want me to hit the number of publications you have, I wanna make sure I make that point if you're expecting me to speak to that. As a department chair, many folks ask me to write letters to speak to their teaching, because I have access to their evaluations and I've supervised them in that teaching experience. But I'll always then follow up and say, what points would you include? So I make sure that I'm reflecting the student's application as well. Yeah, they take quite a bit of time. They're lengthy. I'll ask for your letter of intent so that I can know how you're positioning yourself. So I would recommend staying away from canned letters as much as possible, because I think there is an individualization that can occur.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your field?
Geology.
Okay, so I would give a totally different
Yeah.
answer, and I think it's because of the nature of the field. We do canned, pretty much a canned letter, because of the Because our students are mostly submitting them to Interfolio, which is a resource that can help send out your whole folio, your dossier, like all of your letters. So in my field, it would be more likely that you would maybe ask 5 people to write a letter, knowing that 1 or 2 of those letters is very teaching focused, somebody who's overseen your teaching and has observed your class or been your home supervisor or something like that. It's just not practical for us to write specific letters to specific institutions as recommenders. But if you have more letters than you need in Interfolio, I believe they let you say, I want to send these 3 to this institution. You have to see how it works with your institution. Yeah, so we just have to be kind of canon with it. I'd say please give your faculty as much possible time to do it as they can, because it does take up the room. And then our assumption, searching for candidates as well as putting our students on the market, is that that it's your own materials that are specialized and are targeted towards the institution where you're applying. I have more to say about that, but yeah, I think the applicant should be very, very attuned to where they're sending that letter and not get us confused with Dartmouth College or that happens all the time. They just put the wrong name. I mean, it's not like you're cheating on them, but we know you're applying to a lot of places, but you know, that kind of attention to detail. Okay. Speak very well.
Yeah, great points by the other panelists. You know, the only thing I guess I would add is things are changing now with the new platforms like Interfolio that Dr. Becker was mentioning. That really does change things. I think in the past, when you had particularly a mentor, maybe you're the chair of your committee, would really write a specific letter aimed at a particular department, let's say, that you were very, very much wanted a position at. I think that does carry some weight. I think when people are evaluating applications, that does matter. But increasingly, as Dr. Becker mentioned, that's not possible anymore. You have to submit one letter and it's going to go out to all of the places that you apply. So I would say to the extent, and it is also, it's difficult. It's a big ask if you're asking your letter writers to customize their letters. I think that's a very, very big ask if you're applying to a dozen, maybe for a dozen jobs, and you want them to customize it. I think that's asking too much. I think there are shortcuts. There are things that you can do. You can categorize your letters. You can say, okay, well, I mean, if it is possible to send different letters and not an Interfolio situation, and not everybody's using these sort of platforms, so that you could say, well, these are these are research focused jobs. These are liberal arts focused jobs. This is community college jobs, if you're interested in all that range. And then have your letters maybe reflect those sort of broad categories. But, and letter writers can tweak them if they're willing to do that. I think that's more likely that your primary advisor would do that for you.
Okay.
Rather than your other letter writers. But again, sort of the way these things are managed now limits that. And I would also say that, especially for the platform basis, oftentimes, and even not, the letter writer, when they're submitting it, they'll be told, these are confidential letters. Yeah. And you know, it's not going to be shared with the applicant. You do need to keep that in mind. I agree with Joe. I'm not the type of professor that is likely going to agree to write a letter, at least eagerly, if a student approaches me. I'll certainly let them know, well, maybe you want to talk to somebody that knows your work a little bit better or whatever, but I don't think I can write a strong one. I do think it's important to choose your letter writers carefully. They should know you. They should really know your work and not just be someone you took a seminar with three years ago.
Okay,
yeah. That you really liked, right? They need to know you and your strengths.
Thank you.
I'm gonna just follow up with one. Is there a question online?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna follow up with one logistics point, because this is something that I've heard several times over the last year. It's come up a few times with students, is that often when you are applying for a job, there is actually a button you push that says, I waive the right to see my letter of recommendation.
That's right.
And you don't know who's on the other end of that waiver. And so it may be a group of faculty who wants to make sure that all applicants have pushed that button, that they've all waived their right to see that letter. And it may be a group of faculty who don't care if you see the letter or not. So my advice has always been, click the button, waive your right, because if you are lucky, you will have letter writers, like the esteemed professors on this panel, who are going to share that letter with you and won't agree to write it unless it's a strong one. But you want to be confident that that letter that's being submitted on your behalf for a job is written by someone who knows your work, who knows where you're applying, and who can speak to the discipline, what is necessary in that discipline for you to be successful. So my advice is to push the button that says you waive, even though it would really be fantastic if you selected folks who are willing to share that letter with you, so that you know what's being said.
And I think the point there, if it isn't clear, is that the candidates then feel as though the letter writers really do have the opportunity to be candid. And that's being communicated, and so who's evaluating the panel or the committee that's evaluating these applicants then feel a little bit more at ease with that process. I mean, I think that's the reason.
Iggy, we had a question online.
Yes. So we have one question in the chat asking about how did you all adjust your strategy when applying to a lot of academic positions? What improved in your applications as you applied?
Wow, that's a great question. I think Dr. Becker should take that one
Yeah,
first.
okay. Well, I did it over 3 years, honestly. In the first year, I was not ready. I probably shouldn't have, but I learned a lot. I got some good interviews too. So there's one thing that I felt made a huge difference in my 3rd year when I got multiple interviews and a couple of job offers. And that was going to speak directly to a strategy in the letter. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I got more of an awareness of just how many applicants there are for each of these jobs. I think probably at the time I was applying, there was never a job where there were fewer than 100 candidates, maybe like 150. And I got this advice from my dad, who's a historian, and he said, put everything in the first paragraph. Every impressive thing you can, you know, whether that's who you studied with or where you published or whatever else will be relevant to your field, like put the greatest hits in the first paragraph, because sometimes people don't have time to read more than that. And I don't know, that it actually was clarifying to me, just as a candidate, but it also seemed to work. Yeah.
What did I learn? A couple of the things that Megan said, for sure, I did understand how competitive it was at the time I was applying. This is over 20 years ago. I think it's perhaps a little bit less competitive now, but again, 100, 150 applicants for every position. How to stand out? What is going to be the thing that's going to make the difference? And that came with experience. It came with talking to more people about it. It came with that iterative process. For me, it's customization. I'm guessing we're all going to say this when it comes to letters of intent. I'd probably say if there's one thing that you really, really want to nail, that you really want to polish, that you just want to be perfect, it's that cover letter. Yeah. That's it. That's the one. That's where you make, and that has to be customized. It has to be customized to where you're applying. And if you're, I suppose there may be disciplines, at least that's, I think, true in anthropology. There may be disciplines where you'd be sending out, dozens and dozens and dozens, and it simply wouldn't be feasible. But, you know, I think that, and then the corollary of that when you would get an interview is know the department that you're interviewing in, know roughly who folks are and what their work is in general, at least topically, and be able to recognize names and maybe even know them. I mean, so it's the same thing with those cover letters. That makes a huge difference. And having sat on a lot of these committees, when applicants in their cover letter, you know, say, you know, something that clearly suggests that they know something about the department, they know about some of the work that's being done in the department, and they can articulate why they think they're a good fit. They're a good fit for the department, and the department's a good fit for them. That goes a long way. I mean, for me, that before I look at anything else, that's going to go into the pile of at least take a second look. So,
Okay. So I want to stay on the letter of intent, or the personal statement, or the cover letter. It's called different things in different disciplines, but I want to stay on that because I think it's really important, and you preempted the question, Dr. Benyshek, so thank you for that, because I know that we have more questions here than we can get to today. So we're going to do the highlights, but because that one particularly came from a student, I want to stick with it. In that letter, you mentioned that you think that's the single most important piece of an application, and I saw our colleagues nodding. And that was such a wonderful piece of advice your dad gave you. I think that's really smart, and I wish I had known that when I was on the job market, and I would have really thanked him on all the search committees I've been on if that had also been the case.
Yeah.
But so with that in mind, what are some other tips that you can give students who are preparing that letter for how to structure it, or some of the sort of highlights, or even sometimes I like to frame this question, what do you not want to see? Because sometimes that's actually faster and easier to articulate to students who are just starting out. So either way, what do you think should be hit as a highlight, or alternatively, what should you avoid doing?
I'm sorry.
You know, I all of that, I think the details, I'll tell you as department chair, I am shocked by the number of people that apply to UNLV and call us University of Las Vegas, Nevada. Like, don't get the title of the university wrong. So I think those things really matter because it shows whether you paid attention. Then I'll also say in our field that, and I'm sure it's the same across, there's the minimum qualifications and then there are preferred qualifications. We are communicating to the applicants in our preferred qualifications who we think would round out our team. The minimum in our field tend to be like a PhD, teaching experience, et cetera. And so we're opening it up to anybody who meets those minimum. But in preferred, that's where we say we're looking for somebody with an emphasis in bilingual special education. And so I think the letters that stand out to me are the ones that speak to both the minimum and the preferred qualifications. Because to the point that was made, we're looking for somebody who's going to round out us, and that's somebody who's going to thrive at UNLV. And so that is where we kind of communicate how to set yourself apart from the pool. And when people really tailor their application materials to those things that are in the job announcement and call them out, right? We tell our students, like, make headers of the preferred qualifications and put your activities under those headers, because we're reading a lot of them. And if you call us out and tell us explicitly, here's where my publication record is, here's all these things, it's easy for us to get to the information. It shows us that you really read our call, figured out who we are, what we're looking for, and it helps us jump to that conclusion of saying, this is a candidate we want to talk more to. So again, I think one thing you'll hear is personalization of those letters, because it is our introduction to you for us to know that you fit our job criteria.
Yeah. I think that's great. I'll just jump on real quickly and then turn it over to Dr. Becker. And there are some page limits. Actually, you will see sometimes that the calls will say your cover letter can't be more than so many pages. This is true of letters of recommendation too. And I would say this, don't make your letter too long. Even if they don't have page limits, don't make it a 3 or 4 page letter. In fact, I would say definitely not more than 2. And the closer that you can get it to 1, 1.5, the better. That's challenging, particularly if you're really going to try to hit all of the essential qualifications that preferred. And maybe my colleagues would disagree on that length. But part of this goes to what Dr. Becker was saying earlier about, you might just kind of read carefully the first paragraph and then skim the rest. And oftentimes that first paragraph is a lot of, I am delighted to apply to the department of blah, blah, blah. You know, it's basically, and you're already sort of blurring over. Yeah, watch the length, and you're gonna hear one more time. Folks, we've all seen this so many times. Proofread, proofread, proofread. We do know that you are applying to many departments, many positions. And we understand that. But it does sort of speak to your attention to detail, how important this letter to this position, to this particular position was to you. And it's sloppiness. And we've all made those sort of mistakes. I'm sure I have. But to the extent that you can really work to double and triple proofread to make sure, especially those references to the department, to the university are correct is important. And one of the things you might do is, you know, just make sure you highlight those in your final drafts and make sure that you're always consistent throughout in terms of the university and department. So.
I think I would say, yes, don't go over 2 pages, even if you have to make that a smaller font. And also don't provide a wall of text to describe your dissertation. And I think something, so that's very concrete, but I would say the other thing you're doing is that you are presenting yourself as a professional and as a colleague, as a professor, prospective professor. You're not a student anymore. And so I think if you're just deep in your head in a 15-line paragraph about your dissertation, that will make us stop reading. But it also maybe signals that you're too far in your research and you don't think about students, or that you're so inside your research you didn't read the job ad, or that you just have no mercy on your search committee reading all these letters. So yeah, I think not going on too long, but also just thinking about how you're presenting yourself in the course of that. I've seen some really interesting dissertations, but that's usually in the second paragraph, and when it's too dense or too long or too inside of itself, it's a turnoff.
I'll add on 2 points. The first one is I'd like to share some don'ts that I have seen that are so extreme you won't believe me that they're real, but I assure you they're real. And when I mention them, Dan will probably start laughing because I was so horrified at both of these instances in my own career. Doesn't matter whom, I'm not going to tell you the time period. We don't know who's going to watch this YouTube video. It doesn't matter who these people are, but I will tell you the story. The story is that I knew a person who, in their cover letter, wrote in the first paragraph, "My CV speaks for itself." And their whole cover letter was 1 paragraph. They did not get any interviews that year. Okay, spoiler alert, they did not. And they went back on the market and back on the market and refined the process, reached out to their professors, reached out to their mentors, reached out to other people, received feedback, retooled, and are now very successful in their field and just got tenure. So even when we make mistakes, we can rebound, but don't do that. Also, the second don't that I would, the story I'll tell, is I was on the job market and I had made it to, so typically the way it works in these processes, it's a bit different, but there's almost like different levels. And so I had made it to the point where I wasn't a finalist, I wasn't interviewing yet, but I had made the long list. They were asking for additional materials at that point to see how they were going to shorten that list of candidates down to those top folks they were going to bring in to interview. And at that point, someone in that part of the process, when they were asked for additional materials, shared that they did not have the time for those additional materials. And were they to be invited for an on-campus interview, at that point, they'd be happy to share syllabi, a teaching philosophy, a diversity statement. They also did not get invited to interview for that job and did not make the finalist list. And so be thinking about who is on the other end, who is reading your materials, and be thinking about how you want to present yourself.
No matter how impressive you think you are.
Right,
as a
and you
candidate.
very well may be, but they are interviewing you just as much as you are interviewing them. And I think that was such a great point. They're looking for a colleague. They're looking to see who will work as their colleague within the department. And so it's important to keep those in mind. And then the other thing I will say what I tell my students is I always like to see, if you're applying to a research intensive position, if you're applying to a position where you will be expected to do research, I always have them put somewhere in there. Sometimes you'll have a separate standalone statement for this, but I always have them somewhere in there put their 5 and 10 year research plan, even if it's just 2 sentences, just so that you can see that the candidate, we want to see that the candidate is thinking about their own future and their own trajectory of research. Because when you hire someone, you want them to get tenure. You want them to succeed. And so we want to see that you're thinking about that too, I think. Any other questions on that? No. Okay, great. So I'm just keeping an eye on time. I want to make sure that we get out of here on time. I would like to move in our last few minutes here to talking about the CV, which is another very important part of preparing the materials. There will be discipline-specific materials. Sometimes you'll be asked for a teaching statement. Sometimes you'll be asked for a diversity statement. We're going to have special workshops on those particular things. But for right now, I'd like to talk a bit about the CV. And I know that it's very discipline-specific, but just in general, what are some tips as you are preparing a CV for the job market to be circulated? What are some tips that you can provide to our students? Dr. Becker, we'll start with you.
It looks different than a resume. It should not look like you're applying to be a store manager at wherever. You don't need to tell them in my field, you don't need to tell them what programs you know how to use. It should not look like a resume. It should look like a curriculum vitae for an academic job. I think leaving out, people will read what's not there, so don't leave out pertinent information about when you got your degree or where you got your undergraduate degree. In my field, people will put what they have in progress or under submission, and that is regarded as part of the publication process, but just definitely accurately and honestly represent everything you're doing, and do not overstate the stage where that piece is. If in progress means you have an idea and in 2 years you might start writing the article. It's fine if you're new. We have hired people we hired 3 people this year. One person was already teaching for us. One person had not finished her dissertation yet. One person was 1 year past her dissertation. So we are willing to hire people at every stage. If you are just finishing your dissertation, we recognize that you're not a seasoned professional yet, but don't overstate what it is you've done. Just be honest and be proud of it and be clear. CVs probably shouldn't go on forever. If you're in a junior position.
Yeah, I agree. I think don't inflate. I think we see a lot of them where we'll add in progress or ideas in with publications to make it look like there are more. And it's easier for us to just delineate out what you're doing, what you're working on, et cetera. One thing I recommend is make sure your CV aligns with your letter of interest, that you're saying you do work, that there's evidence that you do that work. We'll find people will say we're committed to diverse students in urban education environments, but then none of their work has ever experienced that. And that's okay, we're looking for potential, but if your work is focused on rural students in a different setting, it kind of is a red flag to us that says like they've written a letter to our job announcement, but that's not the actual work that they're doing in their scholarship. One thing we look for in CVs is potential, because we've hired folks with 20 publications and folks with 2 publications, and we're looking for folks with ideas that can generate grant dollars, that can generate scholarship, and is going to be interest to the teacher education programs here. So I think we are often looking for potential. We know you can't control always what happens in your doctoral program, but we're looking for that you've got a clear trajectory of the work that you would do when you join as a colleague. And so I think that's one thing that we look for at CVs is that idea to fit with us, fit with our community, and do the type of work that's needed here at UNLV to get some of those national recognitions through grant dollars, et cetera.
Great points, all. The only thing I would say is, again, this comes back to the customization theme. I think everyone knows what my take-home message is going to be. I think what you can, these are the little things that can set you apart. I think there is something to be said for, again, thinking about the jobs you're applying for, assuming that there is a diversity. Perhaps you're perfectly happy thinking about a teaching intensive position, maybe at a liberal arts school or a community college, but you also, especially if you're thinking of a career ladder and that is a first job, but you're also going to go for that dream job at an R1 university where you're going to be focusing on research and publications. I think if you're thinking about that kind of diversity, you can have a CV that is going to be emphasizing the things that R1 universities are probably more likely to look at. So after your introductory information about your education and so forth, research, research in general, publications specifically, and grant dollars for some disciplines, that's more important than others. If you got a NSF doctoral dissertation improvement grant, that should be right up front. That should be one of the first categories that the committee sees, with dollar amounts, all those sorts of things. Certainly prestigious journals, publications, those should be right up top. If you're applying through a teaching intensive position, maybe it's a community college where they're not really going to be worried about if you've published at all yet, perhaps. They're really focusing on your teaching. And obviously that's going to be up front. And you're not only going to talk about how much teaching experience you have, the different courses you've taught, and so forth. Again, there's that customization aspect. And again, it's more work because you might have 2 or 3 different versions of your CV, depending on where you're applying. But again, it's these little things, I think, that can make a difference between going in this pile versus this pile early on. And that oftentimes can make the difference of whether or not you get an interview or maybe you get the job.
And this is your first impression. So these materials are your first impression, and you want a chance to meet these folks. You want a chance for them to bring you to the university to interview you. So you want to make a good impression. So we're going to end a bit early today. Do we have any final questions? We have time for one more question, either from the students in the room or from any of our participants who are joining online. All right, I'm going to take the opportunity. I'll give it 5 more seconds. Do we have someone?
We have some.
Oh, we have one. All right, I won't take it.
Would you address how you may or may not want your students to use ChatGPT in the teaching philosophy part of the cover letter? Even if a department has such a rule, they probably do not publish it anywhere. I understand that use of ChatGPT can be very different in different fields. I am in the STEM field. Is it risky to state that I fully embrace ChatGPT and will have assignments that are harder for ChatGPT to answer directly?
Wow, that is a doozy for the last 5 minutes. So before I know that some folks are going to have to leave. So I will say, be looking for panels that we're rolling out this year on ChatGPT in particular that will cover this in a much more in-depth way where we have time to unpack that. But if anyone wants to take a stab at that, please.
It would be a hard no for me.
Okay.
Do not bring that up.
Okay.
Says the English professor.
Right, and you're going to see a lot of variation in these answers, not only on this panel, but at our institution.
I would say this is an enormous debate in higher education right now, and beyond. But certainly in higher education, there seems to be 2 pretty well entrenched camps. Those that think this is part of the evolution of human beings and intelligence and productivity, and that we have to incorporate it into everything we do, embrace it. And there are those that think that we should try to resist it with all of our strength, that it is a black hole that is going to swallow us up. So I think the only thing that I'll say about this is that there is a big debate right now. So by being very explicit about this in a letter, I would agree with Dr. Becker on this. Regardless of where you stand on this issue of AI, by putting it front and center, I would avoid it. Because by putting it front and center, I mean, you might have to deal with that issue at an interview down the line.
Yeah.
And maybe there'll be workshops in the future where you can talk about strategies for that. But I think in putting it in something like a letter, what you're doing is you are letting everyone know what your position is essentially in this debate, which I think is probably pretty largely split in academia. And so that means you're going to turn off probably on average, half of your audience in terms of committees. So I would tread very, very carefully. This is a very fluid and dynamic situation and an ongoing debate, and I would try to avoid it as much as possible, especially in the early application.
I see both sides, so I agree. I think it's such a divisive issue. It's hard to engage in the nuance of this conversation, conversations like this in a letter where you can't actually engage in discourse. I think questions like that on how are you approaching new technologies, those might come up in conversations if you get an on-campus interview in Zooms, et cetera. But I think I recommend, same as my colleagues, straying away from divisive issues in higher education in a letter where there's no conversation that can go back and forth, because you may have a different opinion than the group that you're working with, but through discussion, they're like, oh, that's a new thought. I love that new thought. I'd love the new thinking. But if I just read a letter, all I can read is whatever you wrote down on a sentence. And I think those hot button things sometimes can be more divisive than they need to be when you're applying for a position. So
And I just say more generally, just don't give a reason for someone to put you in the reject pile.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Oh,
don't be
right.
polemical.
Yeah.
Another big piece of advice, don't say anything negative about anyone or anything. That's a huge, people just respond psychologically to that. Don't self-deprecate at all. Don't be an egomaniac. I'm the one for you. My CV speaks for itself. But I would not put anything in a letter that would be a reason for someone to put me in the discard pile.
I think that's a great piece of advice to end on. And just to speak to the teaching statement, we will have an entire panel on how to do your teaching statement and how to prepare your demonstration course if you are asked to teach a course as part of your job interview.
And diversity statement, I would.
Yes, and also we
Because that's
have
a
a
big
whole
issue.
workshop on preparing your diversity statement as well. So stay tuned for those additional workshops. Thank you so much for those outstanding questions from the online audience and the in-person audience. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I would please join me in a round of applause to thank our panelists for joining us here. We could have done this for a whole nother hour and we still wouldn't have run out of content. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you soon.